My name is Rebecca Morrison. I'm 28 years old, and I'm standing in what used to be our elegant dining room at our family estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. Crystal glasses lie shattered across the Persian rug, my mother's prized china scattered in pieces, and my entire family sits in stunned silence around our mahogany Christmas table. Just moments ago, my boyfriend David delivered the most devastating blow our family has ever received. His words still echo in my ears as federal agents pound on our front door. Your precious family empire is built on lies, and I have proof. Before we dive into this explosive Christmas story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you're ready to hear how one dinner destroyed a pharmaceutical fortune worth hundreds of millions, hit that like button and subscribe for more shocking family drama stories. Trust me, you won't believe what my family did next. The Morrison name carries weight in Connecticut's elite circles, and not just because of our sprawling Greenwich estate with its perfectly manicured gardens and circular driveway lined with luxury cars. My father, Jonathan Morrison, built Morrison Pharmaceuticals from a small medical supply company into a multinational empire worth over $300 million. The company's headquarters in Stamford employs thousands of people, and our family's charitable foundation appears in society pages across the Northeast. My mother, Catherine Morrison, sits on the boards of 3 major charities and hosts fundraising galas that regularly raise millions for causes ranging from children's hospitals to environmental conservation. My older brother Trevor, 32 years old and heir apparent to the pharmaceutical throne, serves as Vice President of Operations at Morrison Pharmaceuticals. He graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Business School and married Amanda, a sharp-tongued lawyer from a prominent Boston family who specializes in corporate litigation. Together, they represent everything my parents dreamed their children would become: successful, wealthy, and socially connected. My younger sister Lily, 24 and still finishing her master's degree at Yale, embodies the perfect blend of intelligence and privilege that opens every door in our social circle. Then there's me, the family disappointment. While my siblings pursued prestigious careers that would elevate the Morrison legacy, I chose to become a public school teacher in New Haven. The decision horrified my parents, who couldn't understand why I would waste my education and family connections on a profession they considered beneath our social status. My modest salary of $45,000 a year barely covers my small apartment's rent, a stark contrast to Trevor's 7-figure income and Lily's limitless trust fund allowance. 6 months ago, everything changed when I met David Chin at a community center charity event in New Haven. I was volunteering to help underprivileged children with reading skills when this incredibly intelligent, passionate journalist approached me during the lunch break. David worked as an investigative reporter for the Hartford Courant, focusing on stories about corporate accountability and social justice. His intense brown eyes and genuine concern for the children we were helping immediately drew me to him. David came from a completely different world than mine. His father had worked in a textile factory for 30 years before the plant closed and moved operations overseas. His mother cleaned houses for wealthy families to help pay for David's journalism degree at the University of Connecticut. Despite their financial struggles, David's parents instilled in him an unwavering sense of integrity and compassion for others that I had never encountered in my privileged social circle. Our relationship developed slowly and secretly. I knew my family would never accept David based on his working-class background and modest income. Previous attempts to introduce boyfriends to my family had ended in disaster when they failed to meet the Morrison standards of wealth, social connections, and Ivy League credentials. My last relationship with a fellow teacher had crumbled under the weight of my family's constant criticism and social pressure. David and I spent our time together exploring small restaurants in New Haven, taking long walks through East Rock Park, and having deep conversations about everything from literature to social justice. He introduced me to a world where people's worth wasn't measured by their bank accounts or family names. For the first time in my life, I felt truly understood and appreciated for who I was rather than what my family represented. Despite our different backgrounds, David never seemed intimidated by my family's wealth or social status. He listened patiently when I described the pressure to maintain appearances and participate in charity events that felt more like social competitions than genuine philanthropy. His perspective on corporate responsibility and media accountability fascinated me, though I noticed he became somewhat evasive whenever our conversations touched on pharmaceutical companies or healthcare policy. As our relationship deepened over the months, I began to dream of a future with David that didn't require my family's approval or financial support. However, the approaching Christmas season brought mounting pressure from my mother to bring home a suitable young man for the holidays. She had already arranged introductions to several eligible bachelors from prominent families, hoping to redirect my romantic interests toward more appropriate choices. The tension between my love for David and my family obligations reached a breaking point in early December. During a particularly heated phone conversation with my mother, I made the impulsive decision to invite David to our traditional Christmas Eve dinner. My announcement was met with shocked silence, followed by my father's stern warning that any young man entering our home would be thoroughly evaluated for his suitability as a potential Morrison family member. The 3 weeks leading up to Christmas Eve felt like preparing for a battle I couldn't win. My anxiety about introducing David to my family consumed my thoughts during the day and kept me awake at night. I found myself obsessing over every detail, from choosing the perfect dress that would make David feel comfortable while satisfying my family's expectations to coaching him on conversation topics that might find favor with my notoriously difficult relatives. My family's subtle and not-so-subtle comments about my phase of dating inappropriate men intensified as Christmas approached. During our weekly family dinner at the country club, my mother made pointed references to the Whitman family's youngest son, a Harvard law graduate who had recently joined a prestigious Manhattan firm. Trevor contributed his own observations about the importance of strategic partnerships in both business and marriage, while Amanda shared legal anecdotes about prenuptial agreements and asset protection that seemed designed to remind everyone of our family's financial vulnerability to fortune hunters. Meanwhile, David's behavior began to concern me in ways I couldn't quite articulate. He started working longer hours at the newspaper, often staying at the office until well past midnight. When I called him during these late-night work sessions, he sounded distracted and tense, cutting our conversations short with promises to call me back that sometimes never materialized. His apartment, usually tidy and organized, became cluttered with stacks of documents and manila folders that he quickly shuffled out of sight whenever I visited. The mysterious phone calls started about 2 weeks before Christmas. David would excuse himself from our dinner dates or movie nights to take calls from people he identified only as sources or contacts. These conversations, conducted in hushed tones from another room, left him visibly agitated and preoccupied. When I expressed concern about his obvious stress, David assured me that he was simply working on an important investigative piece that required careful research and discretion. My family, meanwhile, was conducting their own preparation for David's visit. Trevor spent considerable time researching David's background, making snide comments about his education at a state university and his employment at what he dismissively called a small regional newspaper. Amanda used her legal connections to investigate David's financial history, credit score, and any potential criminal record, though she claimed these inquiries were simply due diligence for protecting family interests. The morning I discovered pharmaceutical industry documents scattered across David's kitchen table marked a turning point in my growing unease. The papers included FDA correspondence, clinical trial reports, and what appeared to be internal company memos from various drug manufacturers. When I asked David about these materials, he explained that he was working on a general investigation into healthcare corruption and pharmaceutical industry practices. His explanation seemed reasonable, but something in his tone suggested he wasn't telling me the complete truth. My mother's preparation for Christmas Eve dinner took on the characteristics of a military campaign designed to intimidate and overwhelm any unsuitable suitor. She hired additional staff to ensure every detail of service would be flawless, selected wines that cost more than David's monthly salary, and planned a menu featuring delicacies that would highlight the vast differences between our family's lifestyle and David's modest background. The house was decorated with fresh flowers flown in from Ecuador and arrangements that cost thousands of dollars, all designed to showcase the Morrison family's refined taste and unlimited resources. During one particularly tense conversation the week before Christmas, David almost canceled our dinner plans entirely. He had received another mysterious phone call that left him pale and shaken, and he suggested that perhaps meeting my family wasn't the right decision at this time. Something in his demeanor suggested that his reluctance had nothing to do with social anxiety and everything to do with information he wasn't sharing with me. However, after a long discussion about our relationship's future and my family's importance in my life, David ultimately decided to proceed with the dinner as planned. The final preparations on Christmas Eve morning were marked by an almost surreal quality of nervous energy and anticipation. David arrived at my apartment looking handsome but tense in his best suit, a navy blue ensemble that, while perfectly appropriate, clearly came from a department store rather than the bespoke tailors my family preferred. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his tie, and I noticed he checked his phone constantly for messages or calls that never seemed to come. As we drove through the gates of my family's estate, David's phone rang one final time. The conversation was brief but intense, and I heard him say words that made no sense in the context of a journalism assignment. Yes, I understand the timeline. Everything is in place. When he hung up, his expression had changed from nervous anticipation to grim determination, as if he was steeling himself for something far more significant than a challenging family dinner. The imposing iron gates of the Morrison estate swung open as our modest Honda Civic approached the circular driveway, where it would soon be dwarfed by my family's collection of luxury vehicles. David's 2018 sedan, reliable and practical, but clearly several social strata below the Bentleys, Mercedes, and BMWs that typically graced our driveway, seemed to announce his outsider status before he even stepped foot in our home. I watched my family's faces through the grand front windows as we parked, noting the exchange of meaningful glances and barely concealed smirks that greeted David's arrival. My father answered the door with the kind of stiff formality he typically reserved for service professionals and unwelcome solicitors. His handshake with David was brief and dismissive, accompanied by a cursory "Welcome to our home" that carried no warmth or genuine hospitality. My mother appeared beside him, resplendent in a designer dress that cost more than David's monthly rent, offering her hand for David to shake rather than the warm embraces she typically bestowed upon family friends and social equals. Trevor and Amanda emerged from the living room with expressions of barely contained amusement, as if they were attending a particularly entertaining theater performance. Trevor's greeting included a pointed comment about David's charming little car and a question about whether he had found the estate easily, despite our detailed directions. Amanda's introduction was couched in legal terminology designed to confuse and intimidate, as she inquired about David's professional liability insurance and whether his journalism work required significant legal protections. The tour of our home began immediately, a calculated display of wealth and privilege designed to overwhelm and intimidate any unsuitable suitor. My mother led David through our main gallery, pointing out paintings by minor but expensive artists while casually mentioning their acquisition costs and insurance valuations. The library tour included references to first-edition books and manuscripts that had been in our family for generations, emphasizing our long-standing cultural refinement and educational achievements. Our wine cellar visit became an exercise in sophisticated humiliation, as my father discussed vintages that cost thousands of dollars per bottle while asking David about his preferences in casual dining establishments. Trevor contributed observations about wine investment strategies and the importance of proper storage conditions for collections worth more than most people's homes. David maintained his composure throughout these displays, offering appropriate comments and questions that demonstrated his intelligence despite his obvious discomfort. The questioning about David's profession began subtly, but quickly escalated into barely disguised contempt for his career choice and income level. Amanda inquired about his little newspaper job and whether he had considered transitioning to more substantial journalism opportunities with major national publications. My father expressed surprise that anyone could maintain a reasonable standard of living on a reporter's salary, while my mother worried aloud about the instability and uncertainty of modern journalism careers. Comparisons to Trevor's success became a recurring theme throughout our pre-dinner conversation. My brother's Harvard Business School credentials, his rapid advancement within Morrison Pharmaceuticals, and his substantial compensation package were mentioned repeatedly as benchmarks for measuring professional achievement. Amanda's legal career achievements, including her partnership track at a prestigious Boston firm and her representation of Fortune 500 companies, were highlighted as examples of the kind of ambitious, successful individuals the Morrison family typically associated with. Lily's contributions to the conversation centered around social media and lifestyle observations that seemed designed to emphasize the vast differences between David's background and our family's expectations. She made comments about David's clothing choices, noting that his suit, while perfectly respectable, clearly didn't come from the same exclusive retailers favored by men in our social circle. Her questions about David's travel experiences and cultural interests revealed the gap between his working-class upbringing and our family's assumption that everyone shared our access to international vacations and exclusive cultural events. The pre-dinner drink service became another opportunity for subtle intimidation and social positioning. Our family's preference for expensive single malt whiskeys and vintage champagnes was presented as a test of David's sophistication and cultural knowledge. When David politely declined alcohol in favor of sparkling water, citing his need to drive home safely, Trevor made jokes about designated drivers and whether David's little car was reliable enough for late-night highway driving. During this social minefield navigation, David received another one of his mysterious phone calls, excusing himself to take it privately in our front hallway. The conversation was brief, but appeared to leave him visibly shaken and more tense than before. When he returned to our group, my family members exchanged knowing glances, clearly assuming that he had received bad news about his employment or financial situation. Their smug satisfaction at this perceived confirmation of David's instability was barely concealed behind polite social expressions. The building tension reached a crescendo as we prepared to move into the dining room for the formal dinner service. My family's confidence in their ability to expose David as an unsuitable match for me was evident in their increasingly bold comments and barely disguised hostility. David's mysterious phone call had somehow strengthened his resolve rather than weakening it, and I noticed a new determination in his posture and expression that seemed oddly inconsistent with the social intimidation he had been experiencing. The formal dining room had been transformed into a showcase of Morrison family wealth and refinement, with our best china, crystal, and silver arranged on a table that could easily seat 12 people in comfort. Fresh flowers from our greenhouse created an elegant centerpiece, while candles in sterling silver holders cast a warm glow over place settings that represented several months of David's salary. The seating arrangement had been carefully orchestrated to isolate David between my father and Trevor, ensuring that he would face concentrated questioning from two directions throughout the meal. My father's opening toast set the tone for what would become an increasingly hostile evening. Standing with a crystal glass of vintage champagne, he spoke about the importance of family traditions, the value of appropriate relationships, and the Morrison legacy of excellence in both business and personal associations. His words, while ostensibly welcoming, contained subtle warnings about the family's expectations and standards for anyone seeking to become part of our inner circle. The first course arrived with military precision from our catering staff, accompanied by wine selections that my father announced with detailed explanations of their vintage years and acquisition costs. The conversation immediately turned to Trevor's recent successes at Morrison Pharmaceuticals, including his promotion to Vice President of Operations and his supervision of several major drug development projects. Trevor's detailed explanations of pharmaceutical industry complexity were clearly designed to highlight his expertise while emphasizing the vast educational and professional gaps between himself and David. My mother's contributions to the dinner conversation focused on Rebecca's previous relationships with what she termed suitable young men from prominent families. She shared stories about dinner parties with the Whitman family, whose youngest son had recently graduated from Harvard Law, and social events with the Richardson family, whose heir was completing his medical residency at Johns Hopkins. These tales of appropriate romantic connections were delivered with pointed glances at David, emphasizing how different he was from the type of men the Morrison family typically welcomed. Amanda's legal background provided her with sophisticated methods of intimidation and intellectual condescension. She peppered her conversation with complex legal terminology and references to high-profile cases she had handled, always followed by explanations that treated David as if he couldn't possibly understand such elevated professional concepts. Her questions about David's understanding of media law and journalistic liability were designed to expose his perceived inadequacies while demonstrating her superior education and expertise. The discussion of our family's charitable contributions and social standing became another weapon in the coordinated attack on David's suitability. My mother described recent fundraising galas that raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for various causes, while emphasizing the exclusive nature of these events and the prominent families who participated. My father discussed Morrison Pharmaceuticals' corporate charitable giving, including million-dollar donations to medical research facilities and educational institutions. David's attempts to contribute meaningfully to the conversation were met with dismissive comments and barely concealed condescension. When he mentioned his volunteer work at the community center where we met, Trevor made jokes about charity work and suggested that such activities, while admirable, hardly constituted serious professional networking or career advancement. Amanda questioned whether David's journalism work had ever contributed to meaningful social change compared to the Morrison family's substantial financial contributions to various causes. The conversation's pivot to direct financial attacks began during the main course, as my family started questioning David's ability to provide adequate financial security for a member of the Morrison family. My father's lecture about the costs associated with maintaining an appropriate lifestyle included specific references to country club memberships, private school educations, and the financial requirements for participating in our social circles, expected activities, and charitable obligations. Trevor's offer to help David find more substantial employment within Morrison Pharmaceuticals was delivered with patronizing concern for David's financial future and career advancement possibilities. He suggested that David's journalism background might translate well to corporate communications or marketing roles, positions that would provide better compensation while requiring him to abandon his current investigative work. The implication was clear: David's current profession was insufficient for serious consideration as a long-term partner for a Morrison family member. My mother's emotional appeals focused on her fears that I was throwing away the advantages my family had provided throughout my life. She spoke about the sacrifices my parents had made to ensure their children had every possible opportunity for success, and her confusion about why I would choose to associate with someone whose background and prospects seemed so limited compared to the eligible men available within our social circle. Amanda's barely concealed threats about investigating David's financial history and personal background were presented as routine due diligence that any responsible family would conduct when evaluating potential family members. She mentioned her legal connections' ability to research credit histories, employment records, and any potential legal difficulties that might affect someone's suitability for association with a family of our prominence and financial standing. Lily's cruel observations about David's appearance and educational background represented the evening's most direct and personal attacks. She made unflattering comparisons between David's department store clothing and the custom-tailored suits worn by men in our social circle. Her comments about state university educations versus Ivy League credentials were designed to reinforce the class distinctions that my family considered insurmountable barriers to accepting David as an appropriate partner. David's growing anger beneath his calm exterior became increasingly evident as the evening progressed. His responses to my family's attacks remained polite, but carried an edge that suggested he was reaching his limit of tolerance for their condescending treatment. I began to fear that he might simply leave before dessert was served, ending our relationship and confirming my family's beliefs about his unsuitability as a long-term partner. The breaking point arrived during my father's declaration that David was completely unsuitable for serious consideration as a romantic partner for any Morrison family member. This pronouncement, delivered with the authority of someone accustomed to having his opinions accepted without question, represented the culmination of an evening's worth of systematic humiliation and character assassination designed to drive David away permanently. My tearful defense of David's character and our relationship's value was met with more concentrated attacks from my family members, who seemed energized by their success in provoking an emotional response from me. Their coordinated assault on both David's suitability and my judgment in choosing him represented years of accumulated frustration with my refusal to conform to their expectations and social standards. David's quiet request to speak privately with my family marked a turning point in the evening's dynamics. Something in his tone and expression suggested that he had reached a decision about how to respond to their treatment, and I found myself terrified about what he might say or do next. The mysterious phone calls and unusual behavior of recent weeks suddenly seemed connected to this moment of confrontation with my family's prejudices and attacks. David's transformation from nervous dinner guest to confident investigative journalist was startling in its completeness and sudden intensity. Standing at the head of our formal dining table with calm authority that commanded immediate attention, he announced that he had been conducting an extensive investigation into Morrison Pharmaceuticals for the past 8 months. The change in his demeanor was so dramatic that even my family's usual dismissive attitudes faltered in the face of his obvious professional competence and serious purpose. My family's initial confusion and dismissive laughter quickly evaporated as David began presenting specific evidence of Morrison Pharmaceuticals' extensive criminal activities. He produced a manila folder from his jacket that contained documents I recognized from his apartment, but now understood in their proper context as evidence of systematic corporate corruption and illegal business practices that spanned several years and multiple regulatory violations. David's detailed explanation of Morrison Pharmaceuticals' illegal drug trials revealed a pattern of deliberate safety protocol violations designed to rush potentially dangerous medications to market ahead of competitors. He described specific instances where the company had falsified safety data, concealed adverse reaction reports, and bribed clinical investigators to overlook serious side effects that could have prevented FDA approval for several major pharmaceutical products currently generating millions in profits. The evidence of price manipulation schemes was even more damning, as David presented internal company communications showing deliberate strategies to artificially inflate medication costs for drugs treating serious medical conditions including diabetes, heart disease, and cancer. These pricing schemes had resulted in patient deaths when individuals couldn't afford life-saving treatments, while Morrison Pharmaceuticals executives celebrated record profits and bonus distributions. David's revelation of illegal human trials conducted in developing countries without proper oversight or patient consent represented the most shocking aspect of his investigation. He had documented Morrison Pharmaceuticals' use of impoverished populations in Central America and Southeast Asia as unwitting test subjects for experimental drugs, often with fatal consequences that were never reported to international health authorities or regulatory agencies. The evidence of corporate espionage against competing pharmaceutical companies included detailed records of Morrison Pharmaceuticals' systematic theft of research data, bribing of competitors' employees, and sabotage of rival companies' clinical trials. These illegal activities had given Morrison Pharmaceuticals unfair advantages in drug development while undermining legitimate medical research that could have benefited patients worldwide. My family's shock and denial became increasingly desperate as David presented each piece of evidence with the thoroughness and precision of someone who had spent months building an airtight case. My father's initial blustering attempts to discredit David's claims quickly collapsed when confronted with recorded phone conversations, internal company emails, and financial records that clearly documented the illegal activities David was describing. Trevor's panic about company stock prices and potential federal investigations was evident in his frantic questions about David's sources and the scope of his evidence. His attempts to minimize the significance of the documents David had presented revealed his intimate knowledge of at least some of the illegal activities, contradicting the family's claims of ignorance about Morrison Pharmaceuticals' criminal behavior. Amanda's immediate shift to legal damage control and threats against David's credibility demonstrated her understanding of the serious criminal liability facing all family members involved in Morrison Pharmaceuticals' operations. Her warnings about defamation lawsuits and challenges to David's journalistic credentials seemed hollow in the face of the overwhelming documentary evidence he had assembled. My mother's horror focused primarily on the social scandal and reputational damage that would result from public exposure of the family's criminal activities. Her concerns about country club memberships and charity board positions seemed absurdly trivial compared to the life-and-death consequences of Morrison Pharmaceuticals' illegal drug pricing and safety violations, but they reflected her inability to comprehend the moral magnitude of what David was revealing. Lily's confusion about how these revelations would impact her lifestyle and educational opportunities revealed her complete ignorance about both the source of our family's wealth and the criminal activities that had funded her privileged existence. Her questions about trust fund accessibility and college tuition payments seemed to miss entirely the ethical implications of benefiting from profits generated through patient exploitation and suffering. David's most devastating revelation was that he had been working undercover for 6 months as part of a federal investigation into pharmaceutical industry corruption. His relationship with me had begun genuinely at the community center, but his deeper involvement with our family had been guided by his professional obligation to gather evidence against Morrison Pharmaceuticals' criminal activities. His explanation of personal motivation revealed that his own grandmother had died because she couldn't afford insulin medications whose prices had been artificially inflated by Morrison Pharmaceuticals' pricing manipulation schemes. This personal connection to the victims of our family's crimes added emotional weight to his professional investigation, making his determination to see justice served both professional and deeply personal. The revelation that federal investigators were already preparing arrest warrants and search warrants based on David's evidence meant that our family's legal troubles were imminent and unavoidable. Company stock prices had already begun plummeting in after-hours trading as rumors of federal investigation leaked to financial markets, and major media outlets were preparing to break the story on Christmas morning. Rebecca's devastation at learning simultaneously about her family's crimes and David's deception created a profound sense of betrayal and confusion about everything she had believed about her life and relationships. The realization that both her family's wealth and her romantic relationship were built on foundations of deception and illegal activity left her feeling completely unmoored from any sense of reality or truth. My family's desperate attempts to negotiate with David and buy his silence with substantial bribes revealed their continued belief that money could solve any problem and prevent any consequence. Their offers of millions of dollars in exchange for David's silence demonstrated their complete failure to understand either his moral convictions or the advanced stage of the federal investigation that was already beyond anyone's ability to control or influence. David's refusal to accept any financial compensation and his explanation of moral obligation to Morrison Pharmaceuticals victims represented a level of integrity that my family had never encountered in their experience with people motivated primarily by wealth accumulation and social advancement. His commitment to seeing justice served regardless of personal cost provided a stark contrast to our family's willingness to prioritize financial considerations over ethical responsibilities. The Morrison family's complete psychological and emotional meltdown began immediately following David's refusal to accept their bribery attempts, as the full reality of their situation became undeniable. The elegant Christmas Eve dinner that had been designed to intimidate and humiliate an unsuitable suitor had transformed into a crime scene where decades of illegal activity were being exposed by the very person they had dismissed as beneath their consideration. My father's rage manifested in increasingly serious threats against David's personal safety and professional reputation. His connections to powerful individuals in pharmaceutical, finance, and political circles had always provided solutions to previous business challenges, and he couldn't comprehend why these same resources wouldn't be sufficient to eliminate the current threat to Morrison Pharmaceuticals' continued operations and family wealth preservation. Trevor's panic about personal legal liability and potential prison sentences revealed his deep involvement in Morrison Pharmaceuticals' day-to-day criminal operations. His frantic questions about federal investigation timelines and potential plea bargain opportunities demonstrated his understanding that senior company executives would face severe criminal penalties, including substantial prison terms and permanent disbarment from pharmaceutical industry employment. Amanda's legal expertise provided her with a clear understanding of the serious criminal charges that federal prosecutors could bring against Morrison family members, including conspiracy, fraud, corruption, and potentially even charges related to wrongful deaths caused by unsafe drugs or pricing manipulation. Her immediate focus shifted to limiting her own legal exposure while advising family members about evidence destruction and witness intimidation possibilities. My mother's social anxiety about country club ostracism and charity board resignations seemed almost comical compared to the life-altering legal consequences facing our family. But it reflected her complete inability to comprehend anything beyond the narrow social world that had defined her entire adult existence. Her concerns about managing appearances and controlling media narratives revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of the situation's gravity. Lily's tantrum about her college lifestyle being threatened represented the self-centered worldview of someone who had never experienced consequences for her actions or limitations on her desires. Her demands for assurance that her trust fund would remain accessible regardless of the family's legal troubles demonstrated her complete disconnect from the moral implications of benefiting from profits generated through patient suffering. My emotional breakdown stemmed from the simultaneous realization that both my family and my boyfriend had deceived me about fundamental aspects of their identities and motivations. The family I had loved despite their flaws had built their wealth through activities that caused real harm to vulnerable people, while the man I trusted had maintained a relationship with me partially as professional cover for his investigation. The family's escalation to more serious threats began when my father's business associates started arriving at the estate in response to his emergency phone calls seeking assistance with crisis management. These individuals, whose own business practices apparently included experience with witness intimidation and evidence destruction, represented a dangerous escalation in the family's response to David's investigation. Trevor's attempt at physical intimidation failed when David calmly reminded him that federal agents were already monitoring Morrison family communications and activities as part of their ongoing investigation. David's obvious lack of fear in the face of physical threats suggested that he had anticipated this possibility and taken appropriate precautions to protect himself and preserve his evidence. Amanda's threats about David's journalistic credentials and potential legal troubles revealed her plan to use the family's legal connections to attack David's professional reputation and credibility. Her strategy involved filing frivolous lawsuits designed to drain David's financial resources while simultaneously challenging his evidence collection methods and investigative techniques. My family's revelation of their own knowledge about Morrison Pharmaceuticals' illegal activities destroyed any pretense that they were innocent victims of rogue employees or regulatory misunderstandings. Their detailed discussions of profit margins, risk management, and cost-benefit analyses related to patient safety violations revealed years of conscious decision-making that prioritized financial gains over legal compliance and human welfare. The family's attempts to justify their criminal behavior through claims about medical advancement and life-saving research rang hollow when confronted with specific evidence of unnecessary patient deaths and suffering caused by their pricing manipulation and safety violations. Their rationalization that some harm was acceptable in pursuit of greater medical progress revealed a moral bankruptcy that shocked even me, despite my growing understanding of their true nature. The sound of police sirens in the distance marked the arrival of federal agents with search warrants for Morrison Pharmaceuticals facilities and family properties. The timing suggested that David's investigation had reached the prosecution stage where evidence collection could proceed with legal authority rather than relying solely on his undercover work and journalistic sources. The family's realization that David's investigation was beyond their ability to control or influence through traditional methods of wealth and power represented a fundamental challenge to everything they believed about their ability to manipulate outcomes and avoid consequences. Their frantic attempts to destroy evidence and coordinate legal responses demonstrated both their guilt and their continued belief that criminal activity could be managed like any other business problem. Rebecca's decision about where her loyalties lay became the evening's most important choice, as she faced the choice between supporting family members who had committed serious crimes or aligning herself with moral principles that demanded justice for Morrison Pharmaceuticals victims. The decision was complicated by her genuine love for family members despite their criminal behavior and her anger at David's deception about his investigation. David's offer to help me separate myself from the family's criminal activities provided a pathway toward maintaining my own moral integrity while potentially avoiding the most serious legal consequences of my association with Morrison Pharmaceuticals. His suggestion that I could cooperate with federal investigators while limiting my legal exposure offered hope for rebuilding my life based on ethical principles rather than inherited wealth. The execution of federal search warrants throughout the Morrison estate began at precisely 6:30 on Christmas morning, as teams of FBI agents and federal investigators systematically dismantled decades of carefully constructed criminal enterprise. The sight of law enforcement vehicles filling our circular driveway and agents carrying boxes of evidence from every room in our home created a surreal contrast to the elegant Christmas decorations that still adorned our property. The seizure of computers, financial records, and internal company documents proceeded with military efficiency as investigators implemented search protocols designed to preserve evidence while preventing any attempts at destruction or concealment. Every family member's personal devices were confiscated, including phones, laptops, and tablets that might contain communications related to Morrison Pharmaceuticals' illegal activities or evidence of ongoing criminal conspiracy. Federal agents questioned each family member separately to prevent coordination of stories or alibis, using interrogation techniques designed to identify inconsistencies and encourage cooperation with the ongoing investigation. My father's attempts to invoke attorney-client privilege and refuse cooperation were unsuccessful, as the scope of the search warrants included provisions for compelling testimony related to corporate criminal activity. The media circus that erupted outside our estate within hours of the federal raids represented a feeding frenzy of journalists, camera crews, and photographers eager to document the downfall of a prominent pharmaceutical family. News helicopters circled our property while reporters provided live updates about the investigation's scope and potential criminal charges facing Morrison Pharmaceuticals executives and family members. Morrison Pharmaceuticals' stock price collapsed completely during Christmas Day trading as news of the federal investigation spread throughout financial markets. The company's market capitalization, which had exceeded $3 billion at the beginning of December, became virtually worthless as investors anticipated criminal convictions, federal fines, and potential bankruptcy proceedings that would eliminate shareholder value. Congressional hearings scheduled for the new year promised to expose Morrison Pharmaceuticals' crimes to national attention while providing a platform for victims and their families to share their experiences with pharmaceutical pricing manipulation and safety violations. Committee chairs announced their intention to use Morrison Pharmaceuticals as a case study for comprehensive healthcare reform and pharmaceutical industry regulation. Victim families began speaking publicly about their experiences with Morrison Pharmaceuticals' illegal pricing schemes and dangerous drugs, providing human faces and personal stories that illustrated the real-world consequences of corporate criminal activity. Their testimony revealed patterns of deliberate deception and callous disregard for patient welfare that extended far beyond the specific evidence David had gathered. My interrogation by federal investigators focused on determining the extent of my knowledge about Morrison Pharmaceuticals' illegal activities and my potential willingness to cooperate with the prosecution's case against family members. My genuine ignorance about the specific criminal activities provided some protection from prosecution, while my teaching career demonstrated that I had deliberately distanced myself from the family business. David's testimony about his investigative methods and evidence collection techniques provided federal prosecutors with the foundation for building criminal cases against Morrison Pharmaceuticals executives and family members. His months of undercover work had generated admissible evidence that would be difficult for defense attorneys to challenge or discredit during criminal trials. The arrest of my father and Trevor on federal charges, including conspiracy, fraud, and corruption, marked the beginning of what would become lengthy legal proceedings with potential prison sentences measured in decades rather than years. The perp walk photographs of Morrison family members in handcuffs created indelible images that would forever associate our name with corporate crime and pharmaceutical industry corruption. My mother and Amanda's release pending further investigation reflected their more limited involvement in day-to-day criminal activities, though both faced potential charges related to money laundering and conspiracy if prosecutors could demonstrate their knowledge of illegal profit sources. Their expensive legal teams immediately began damage control efforts designed to minimize their criminal exposure while preserving whatever family assets might survive federal forfeiture proceedings. Lily's complete breakdown about lifestyle changes and social humiliation revealed her inability to comprehend consequences more serious than temporary inconvenience and social embarrassment. Her concerns about college tuition payments and spring break vacation plans seemed absurdly trivial compared to the federal prison sentences facing other family members and the lifetime financial devastation resulting from criminal conviction and asset forfeiture. My decision to cooperate fully with federal investigators represented a conscious choice to prioritize justice for Morrison Pharmaceuticals victims over family loyalty and financial self-interest. The decision was emotionally devastating but morally necessary, as I gradually understood the scope of harm my family's wealth had inflicted on vulnerable patients and their families throughout years of systematic criminal activity. The freezing of family trust funds and assets during the investigation eliminated my financial security while ensuring that profits from illegal activities couldn't be hidden or transferred to avoid federal forfeiture requirements. This action left me dependent on my teaching salary and forced to confront the reality of supporting myself without the safety net of inherited wealth that had always provided underlying security. The loss of my teaching position due to media attention and association with my family's crimes represented another consequence of their criminal activity that extended beyond immediate family members to affect anyone connected to the Morrison name. The school district's decision prioritized protecting students and staff from media disruption while avoiding any appearance of condoning criminal behavior through continued employment. Social ostracism from former friends and community members reflected the broader consequences of association with criminal activity that extended far beyond legal penalties to include permanent damage to reputation and social standing. Country club memberships were terminated, charity board positions were resigned, and social invitations ceased as the Morrison family became pariahs in their former elite circles. David's conflicted feelings about my suffering revealed the personal cost of his professional obligation to expose Morrison Pharmaceuticals' crimes. His investigation had achieved its intended purpose of bringing criminals to justice, but the collateral damage to our relationship and my personal life created moral complexity about the human cost of journalistic integrity and law enforcement cooperation. The complete upheaval of my life began immediately following my family's arrest and the public exposure of Morrison Pharmaceuticals' crimes, as every aspect of my identity and security was systematically stripped away by the consequences of criminal association. The comfortable existence I had taken for granted throughout my privileged upbringing disappeared overnight, leaving me to navigate an entirely unfamiliar world of financial uncertainty and social isolation. My temporary housing in a modest studio apartment in New Haven represented a dramatic reduction in living standards that forced me to confront the practical challenges of surviving on a teacher's salary without family financial support. The small space, furnished with second-hand items purchased from classified advertisements, provided a stark contrast to the spacious rooms and luxury amenities I had always considered normal rather than exceptional privileges. The media harassment that followed me everywhere made normal activities like grocery shopping and commuting to work exercises in avoiding photographers and reporters seeking comments about my family's criminal activities. My face became recognizable to strangers who would point and whisper when they encountered me in public, creating a constant state of anxiety and self-consciousness about my appearance and behavior. David's internal conflict about his role in my personal destruction created tension in our relationship that proved impossible to ignore or resolve through simple conversation. His professional success in exposing corporate corruption had achieved justice for Morrison Pharmaceuticals victims, but the collateral damage to my life and our relationship created moral complexity that challenged both of our beliefs about right and wrong. Our painful conversations about truth, love, and moral obligations revealed fundamental differences in our perspectives about the acceptable cost of justice and the responsibilities of family members for criminal activities they didn't directly commit. David's conviction that exposing my family's crimes was morally necessary conflicted with my emotional devastation at losing everything I had believed about my identity and security. My therapy sessions with Dr. Patricia Williams, a counselor specializing in family trauma and criminal association, provided professional guidance for processing the complex emotions surrounding betrayal by both family members and romantic partner. These weekly meetings became essential for maintaining my mental health while developing coping strategies for rebuilding my life based on ethical principles rather than inherited advantages. The discovery of additional Morrison Pharmaceuticals victims through David's published articles expanded my understanding of the real human cost of my family's wealth accumulation beyond abstract concepts of corporate wrongdoing to include specific individuals whose lives had been damaged or destroyed by illegal pricing schemes and unsafe drug development practices. Reading these personal stories created overwhelming guilt about benefiting from profits generated through patient suffering. My gradual shift from anger at David toward understanding his moral obligations represented emotional growth that required months of therapy and conscious effort to separate my personal feelings from objective evaluation of his professional responsibilities. The realization that his investigation had prevented additional patient deaths and financial exploitation helped contextualize my personal suffering within broader considerations of social justice. The family's continued manipulation attempts from prison and during legal proceedings revealed their persistent belief that emotional pressure could convince me to change my testimony or refuse cooperation with federal prosecutors. Their letters and phone calls alternated between expressing love and concern for my welfare and making threats about the consequences of continued cooperation with law enforcement. My strength in maintaining ethical positions, despite family pressure and social isolation, demonstrated personal growth that surprised even Dr. Williams, who had warned me about the difficulty of resisting manipulation from family members facing serious criminal charges. The decision to prioritize justice over family loyalty required daily recommitment to principles that often conflicted with emotional desires for reconciliation. David's ongoing support during my darkest periods included practical assistance with apartment hunting and job searching, as well as emotional encouragement when media attention and social isolation threatened to overwhelm my capacity for coping with dramatic life changes. His presence provided stability during a period when everything familiar had been stripped away by circumstances beyond my control. Our relationship's evolution from romantic partnership to supportive friendship reflected the impossibility of maintaining intimate trust after such fundamental deceptions about identity and purpose. while I gradually forgave David for the professional necessities that required him to conceal his investigation. The romantic feelings that had brought us together couldn't survive the revelation that our entire relationship had been partially based on his need for access to Morrison family information. My job search difficulties stemmed from potential employers' reluctance to associate their organizations with the Morrison family scandal, despite my obvious separation from family criminal activities and cooperation with federal investigators. Many school districts and educational institutions preferred to avoid any controversy that might attract unwanted media attention or create public relations challenges. The financial struggles of living without family wealth forced me to develop practical skills and budgeting strategies that had never been necessary during my privileged upbringing. Learning to compare grocery prices, negotiate rent payments, and manage utility bills provided education in economic realities that most people take for granted, but that had been completely foreign to my previous experience. Unexpected support from some Morrison Pharmaceuticals victims and their families created meaningful connections with people who understood the moral courage required to testify against family members despite personal cost. These relationships provided emotional validation for my decisions while demonstrating that ethical choices could create positive outcomes even in difficult circumstances. My volunteer work with pharmaceutical reform advocacy groups provided purpose and meaning that helped compensate for the loss of career opportunities and financial security. Working with other families affected by pharmaceutical industry crimes created a sense of community and shared mission that replaced the social connections lost through association with criminal activity. The congressional testimony I provided about pharmaceutical industry reform represented my public commitment to using my family's criminal experience as educational opportunity for preventing similar corporate crimes. Speaking before national media about the human cost of pharmaceutical corruption required emotional strength that I had developed through months of therapy and personal growth. David's career advancement resulting from his investigative excellence included awards and recognition that validated his professional choices while creating new opportunities for important journalism work. His success provided some compensation for the personal relationships that had been damaged by his undercover investigation requirements and professional obligations. Rebecca's gradual acceptance of new reality and identity separate from family wealth represented the most significant personal growth of my adult life. As I learned to define myself through personal achievements and moral choices rather than inherited advantages and social connections. This transformation required abandoning comfortable assumptions about security and success while embracing uncertainty and independence. The conclusion of federal prosecution efforts against Morrison family members brought mixed emotions of justice achieved and relationships permanently altered by criminal conviction and imprisonment. My father received a sentence of 25 years in federal prison for conspiracy, fraud, and corruption charges, while Trevor's conviction resulted in an 18-year sentence that would effectively end his career and destroy his financial future. The courtroom scenes of once powerful family members being led away in shackles provided closure for victims while creating permanent images of consequences for corporate crime. Amanda's plea bargain agreement included disbarment from legal practice and 5 years of probation in exchange for cooperation with ongoing investigations into pharmaceutical industry corruption. Her legal career, which had been built on corporate connections and family wealth, ended permanently as professional licensing boards removed her authorization to practice law. The plea agreement required substantial community service and financial restitution that would occupy years of her future. My mother's sentence of 3 years of community service and financial restitution reflected her limited involvement in day-to-day criminal activities while acknowledging her knowledge of illegal profit sources and failure to report known criminal behavior. Her social standing and charity board positions were permanently destroyed, leaving her to rebuild relationships and identity based on genuine service rather than financial contributions. Lily's rehabilitation and eventual understanding of our family's criminal impact represented the most positive outcome of the entire legal process, as she transformed from entitled college student to committed advocate for pharmaceutical reform and patient rights. Her testimony at congressional hearings about growing up with blood money provided powerful evidence for legislative changes while demonstrating genuine remorse and personal growth. Morrison Pharmaceuticals' bankruptcy and complete asset liquidation ensured that all company resources would be dedicated to victim compensation rather than enriching shareholders or protecting executive wealth. The federal court's appointment of special masters to oversee asset distribution created transparent processes for calculating victim damages while preventing any family members from retaining profits from criminal activities. My successful legal separation from family criminal consequences resulted from months of cooperation with federal investigators and testimony that helped prosecutors build stronger cases against company executives. The legal immunity I received in exchange for cooperation protected me from prosecution while allowing me to rebuild my life without the threat of criminal charges affecting future opportunities. The new career I developed as pharmaceutical safety consultant and victim advocate provided meaningful work that transformed my family's criminal legacy into positive change for future patients and healthcare consumers. My unique perspective on pharmaceutical industry corruption, combined with first-hand experience of corporate criminal activities' human cost, created valuable expertise for regulatory agencies and advocacy organizations. My modest apartment in New Haven became a source of pride and independence as I furnished and decorated the space using money earned through my own work rather than inherited wealth. The simple furnishings and careful budget management represented freedom from criminal association while demonstrating personal growth and self-sufficiency that would have been impossible while dependent on family resources. David's Pulitzer Prize nomination for investigative journalism recognized the quality and importance of his Morrison Pharmaceuticals investigation while validating his professional choices despite the personal cost to our relationship. The national attention his work received created opportunities for exposing other corporate crimes while providing a platform for advocating pharmaceutical industry reform and patient protection. Our relationship's transformation into lasting friendship based on mutual respect and shared commitment to justice proved more durable than romantic feelings that couldn't survive the deception and betrayal surrounding his investigation. Our quarterly coffee meetings and occasional collaboration on pharmaceutical reform projects maintained connection while respecting the boundaries necessary for moving forward separately. My ongoing therapy with Dr. Williams provided continued support for processing complex emotions surrounding family relationships, criminal association, and identity reconstruction that would require years rather than months to resolve completely. The weekly sessions remained essential for maintaining mental health while developing coping strategies for challenges that arose from my unusual circumstances and public notoriety. Reconciliation with some family members who genuinely accepted responsibility for their criminal behavior created possibilities for limited relationships based on mutual recognition of past harm and commitment to different choices going forward. My relationship with Lily, in particular, developed into genuine friendship as we both worked to understand our family's crimes while building identities separate from inherited wealth and privilege. Permanent estrangement from family members who continued denying responsibility and blaming others for their criminal consequences protected my mental health while maintaining ethical boundaries about acceptable behavior and moral accountability. The decision to limit contact with my father and Trevor, despite emotional difficulty, prevented manipulation attempts while preserving space for continued personal growth. My testimony in multiple criminal trials helped secure convictions that prevented other families from experiencing similar harm while creating legal precedents for prosecuting pharmaceutical industry crimes. The victim impact statements I provided helped judges understand the broader consequences of corporate criminal activity while advocating for appropriate sentences that reflected the severity of patient harm. New romantic relationships developed slowly and carefully as I learned to trust others while maintaining independence and ethical standards that reflected hard-won personal growth. My relationship with Michael Torres, a social worker specializing in healthcare advocacy, grew from professional collaboration into personal partnership based on shared values and mutual respect rather than social expectations or family approval. David's relationship with Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a trauma counselor who helped him process the emotional cost of undercover investigation work, created healthy partnership based on understanding professional demands while maintaining personal boundaries. Their engagement announcement included acknowledgement of the complex emotions surrounding justice work that affects multiple families and relationships. My Christmas volunteer work at homeless shelters and community centers replaced family holiday traditions with service that reflected personal values rather than social obligations. The annual commitment to helping others during holiday seasons provided meaningful tradition while creating positive associations with December dates that had become painful reminders of family betrayal and criminal exposure. The chosen family I developed through advocacy work and genuine friendships provided emotional support and social connection that proved more satisfying than relationships based on wealth and social status. These connections, built on shared values and mutual support, demonstrated that meaningful relationships could develop without family financial resources or elite social connections. My financial stability through pharmaceutical safety consulting work created security based on personal expertise and professional reputation rather than inherited wealth or family connections. The income, while modest compared to my previous lifestyle, provided genuine independence while funding continued education and professional development that supported career advancement. Final reflection on true values revealed that integrity, compassion, and justice provided more satisfaction and meaning than wealth, social status, or family approval ever had during my privileged upbringing. The painful process of losing everything familiar had ultimately revealed what actually mattered for creating meaningful life and positive impact on others facing similar challenges. The life lesson about moral courage and choosing right over easy became central to my identity and decision-making process, as I learned that ethical choices often required personal sacrifice, but created long-term satisfaction that wealth and privilege couldn't provide. This understanding influenced every subsequent decision about relationships, career opportunities, and personal commitments. My closing reflection emphasized hope for others facing similar moral dilemmas about family loyalty versus justice, demonstrating that choosing ethical principles over family pressure was possible even when consequences included loss of financial security and social connections. The message for viewers was that authentic identity and meaningful relationships could survive and even flourish after loss of inherited advantages and family approval. The story's conclusion emphasized finding genuine happiness and purpose through service to others rather than accumulation of wealth or maintenance of social status, while acknowledging that the path to ethical living often required surrendering comfortable assumptions about security and success in favor of uncertainty supported by personal integrity and commitment to justice. What choices would you make if you discovered your family's wealth came from activities that harmed innocent people? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? Share your thoughts in the comments below about how you would handle such an impossible situation. If this story touched you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life drama stories that explore the complex choices we all face. Share this video with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the courage it takes to choose integrity over comfort. Thank you for watching, and I hope your holidays are filled with genuine love and honest relationships rather than secrets that tear families apart.